Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui. We are talking about Cancer energy. I told you that Gemini season was going to be wild, and if you don't believe me, go back to the episode I did before. In fact, go check out the archives of this show if you haven't already, because you might be surprised how much of what is happening right now that I called. I have to say, I don't really toot my horn enough. But if you are a sponsor of this podcast and you've been following me for a minute now, I feel like we have been pretty well prepared for the things that are happening right now. And that doesn't necessarily make them any easier to live through, but we've had heads up. We've had heads up. So if you are someone who likes having a heads up and knowing what is coming down the bend, maybe this is the place for you. But now it's Cancer season, and not only is it Cancer season, but Jupiter recently moved into Cancer, where it'll be until June of 2026. We're really having a Cancerian Cancer season in 2025, and we have more coming our way, but we'll get into it on this show. But strap in, get ready to feel your feels, because it's gonna be all about the emotions and our inner world on this episode. But hey, don't be afraid, because the real ones know that that's exactly where the magic happens. Today on the podcast, I talk about Jupiter in Cancer and you. Then stay tuned for a look at the new moon in Cancer and how to work with this energy. If you haven't heard already, Jupiter moved into Cancer on June 9th, 2025, and it'll be there until June 30th, 2026. And so it spends about a year in each sign. And we just had it in the sign of Gemini for about a year, and that's an air sign. So it was very communicative, very intellectual. For those of us who are interested in building up our communities, you might have found yourself exploring what that means for you, getting more connected, getting more involved, or if you already are involved, probably deepening and expanding upon that connection. So now that Jupiter is in Gemini, we're taking a turn. We're moving into a water sign. The sign of Cancer it's sensitive, it's emotional, it's also known to be pretty protective energy, because our emotions are some of the softest parts of us. And also our history, our childhood, the families that we come from, all of these are really sensitive subjects. And for some of us, there may be history and maybe even trauma or things that have been buried deeply. So some of those things might be more in focus for you right now, as they are for a lot of us collectively. And of course, how it's going to impact you directly is always going to be based on how Jupiter in Cancer is positioned in your chart. But we're going to talk today about a little bit more of what this means for us generally and how we can embrace this energy and really take advantage of the year that we have of Jupiter in Cancer. As Jupiter moves through Cancer, this is really showing us where we're growing emotionally. So if you're not interested in thinking about feelings or examining those things, you might be having a tough year. So first things first, emotions. That is going to be a big theme for the next year. For some of us, emotions are not our favorite thing to talk about, let alone experience, but they are an inherent part of being human. That is really what Cancer energy says. Emotions are the foundations of our intuitive selves. So if we're running away from our feelings, we're running away from parts of who we are. And so Jupiter in Cancer is really asking us to dive in, to not be afraid of how we're feeling and the depths of it, how far down it goes. And for us, as emotional beings, we make a lot of memories based on our emotions. So, the past as a concept is largely driven by our emotional experience of the things that have happened to us. And so when we remember the past, we're conjuring up certain old emotions. So you might find that during Jupiter in Cancer, you're feeling more emotional. Old stuff might be coming up. And instead of, running away from that, Jupiter in Cancer is really inviting us to bravely face whatever it is that we're feeling, no matter if it's good, bad, or ugly in our eyes. We can grow a lot more by just being open. Because when we run away from feelings or our history or things that may be buried deep within us, we're refusing the opportunity to learn more about ourselves and our human experience. So, Jupiter in Cancer is really about diving all the way in. And instead of pushing away the discomfort, maybe sitting down and having a cup of tea. There's a lot of spiritual leaders. I think Thich Nhat Hanh was one who said that whenever an uncomfortable feeling comes up, literally invite it for tea, befriend it, make space for it instead of shutting it down and shutting it off. It's very easy for human beings to be like, no, I don't want to feel that. I don't want to go there. But we're kind of short selling ourselves when we do this. So part of this work is not letting our emotional defenses run the show, right? We can even acknowledge those. We can even sit down and have a cup of tea with our defenses. Like, why are those there? What are they protecting us from? What is at the core of these fears? And we might find that maybe it is things in our history that have shown us maybe it's not safe to explore these deeper sides of ourselves. But if you're watching this, hopefully you are an adult or at least somebody who has enough agency to create a safe space for yourself, right? I think that is one of the biggest things that we can do for ourselves in Jupiter and Cancer is creating safe spaces for ourselves as a basis of really showing up for ourselves emotionally. If we can't even be our own safe space, everything else in life gets that much harder. So, Jupiter in Cancer is really an invitation for us to be emotionally open, at least with ourselves, and showing ourselves that we can really trust that we can be our full emotional selves, at least with who we are. Our emotional health needs to be just as important as our physical health. And I think that's something that's really going to come into focus during Jupiter in Cancer. Those two things are not as separate as we may think they are, right? Our emotional health really dictates our physical health in a lot of ways. Like they're not, totally separate in the way that we might like to think. And so the relationship between those two things and growing our emotional consciousness, just being aware of our emotions. What am I feeling? Checking in with ourselves instead of just being on autopilot all the time. This is a year on a collective level and on a mundane level where we're seeing a lot of shit, okay? We are going to be very emotional, even if we're pushing it down because we have to keep it moving. We have to get stuff done during this year and survive during this year, right? But even if we have to push things away in the moment to just kind of, get through the day, do the things that we are responsible for doing, we still need to make time to actually process those emotions. Otherwise, it's all just getting pushed down and compounded, right? And so for those of us who maybe have a history of doing that, Jupiter in Cancer is going to be bringing a lot of that stuff to the surface, right? Because especially with the world being the way that it is, a lot of us are going to get triggered. A lot of us are going to get triggered. So instead of being like, oh my God, I'm going to get triggered, I'm going to be emotional, and we can't have that, understand that this is kind of part of our learning process through this time period. Because in order to get through the next couple decades of incredible change that human beings have, we have to be a lot more emotionally conscious and emotionally centered, right? Most of us, if you're watching me, you know that the world could be better than it is. We could be treating each other better than we do, right? And a big part of that is that we are going to have to, as human beings, collectively do a lot more of that internal emotional work instead of projecting it on everyone else, making it everyone else's problem. I was just talking to a friend the other day, and, I saw a video of like, there's a million of these online of a stranger snapping at somebody for something that should have been very minor. And then you can tell that that person is unleashing all of their emotional baggage onto a stranger that just happened to piss them off at the wrong time. And how many times do we see that? Because so many of us, instead of processing our emotions, are just pushing them down like the worst trash compactor in the world. And all that stuff will come out at some point, right? So we really need to use whatever resources we can and tend to ourselves emotionally on a deeper level than we may have ever done before. Part of being in the world, especially right now, and especially with Jupiter in Cancer, we are sensitive beings and we do pick up on collective energy and emotions, even if it's on a subconscious level. And some of us are more sensitive to it than others. Regardless of how you feel about your emotions, it's a good practice to learn how to shield yourself energetically. And what I mean by that is whenever you're going into a public space or you're going into a place where other people are there, there's energy, right? There's energy of those people, of the collective. We encounter energy, especially when we're encountering other people, other beings, right? So if you are somebody that finds yourself really sensitive to collective energy, or if you walk into a crowd or you're out in public, it becomes very overwhelming very quickly. Something that is good to know how to do and to actually practice doing and get good at, I think, over Jupiter and Cancer, is energetically shielding yourself. I was taught this by a wonderful mentor of mine, medium Carrie Wilson, who, recognizes that human beings, especially those of us who are really intuitive, we pick up a lot of energy. And so she taught me that it's just as simple as you can do a meditation or even just a visualization. Like I do this often before I go into the grocery store or out in public. In my car, I'll just vision myself putting myself into like a protective, safe bubble. And you can set whatever kind of intentions about that you want, but the idea is that you're visualizing yourself being energetically protected. And when I say protected, it's not because you're in danger necessarily, but you're putting a barrier between yourself and other energy, right? So your intention is just to feel your own energy, right? We don't have to take on everybody's energy if we don't want to. So this practice allows us to actually visualize that process. And that can be very helpful in situations where we find ourselves picking up on a lot of that energy. Likewise, in addition to managing your own emotions and managing your own energy, Jupiter in Cancer is a really good time to go deeper with whatever intuitive work or exploration that you are interested in. Because one of the things that's really important to understand if you are somebody that's kind of in the spiritual space, or if you're not, if you're just a curious person, we are emotional beings because we're spiritual beings. And as they say, emotions are the language of the spiritual world, right? If we are in this process of exploring ourselves emotionally, we're also exploring our spiritual selves. And so if you have been interested in, psychic work or learning tarot or just exploring the things that are a little bit more non-physical, connecting with your higher self, yourself as a spiritual being, because emotional work will be such a big part of the year ahead. If you are not already in therapy or you haven't already explored that, this is a good time to consider that kind of work and having someone that is trained in that sort of emotional processing and a safe space for you to really unpack things that may need unpacking. This is a wonderful time to seek out that kind of support. Or inner child healing, if you have things from your past that maybe just need more attention, right? Because a lot of us didn't get the types of attention that we needed as children, right? And so, one of the things that we can do for ourselves over Jupiter and Cancer is give ourselves the things that maybe we needed when we were younger and we didn't get. We can be the safe space for ourselves. We can be that source of support in some way. And whether that means enlisting other people, asking for help, right? We need to nurture ourselves if we want to be able to show up for other people in the world, right? And so when we can take care of ourselves on an emotional level and seek out that support, we're going to be better able to be of service to ourselves, to our loved ones, and to the collective if that is something that we're interested in doing. Intuitive work might be just as important as the emotional work that we're doing, because a lot of us were raised in more traditional spiritual practices and maybe that's not our thing anymore. So this can also be a great time for spiritual exploration. If you've wanted to take a class, maybe a tarot class, or study psychic mediumship or hypnosis or anything spiritual that has kind of been calling to you, this is also a wonderful time to really invest in that. And one of the things that I've learned doing spiritual work is that so much of spiritual work is emotional work. It's personal work. I know. Spoiler alert. That doesn't mean it's not fun, but it just means that you need to show up to this work willing to examine the deeper sides of yourself, some of the things that might even be more uncomfortable. And that's not because spiritual stuff is like traumatizing or bad or anything like that. But if we want to accept ourselves fully, and show up as our full spiritual selves, that means dealing with the things and parts of ourselves that may not be as cute, as publicly presentable, okay? Because so much of our spiritual power comes from acceptance. And so that means that if we want to be good intuitives, if we want to have those skills really developed, if we want to really open up our spiritual sides, that's our emotional side. So that's going to be a huge theme for those of us who are exploring our spiritual selves or on that kind of path. When we talk about emotions, self-care comes up a lot. And in our consumerist, capitalist society, self-care has often meant, buying a fancy bath bomb and going to get a massage and, things that aren't, those are not bad things to do, right? Those are not damaging. Those can be acts of self-care. But so much of the conversation around self-care has been about consuming, and it has not been so much about that deeper level of self-care. So I think over the course of Jupiter in Cancer, a lot of us are going to have to look deeper at what we consider self-care. And this is going to be a year where we're really being invited to go deeper with it and understand that self-care is so much about our emotional bodies and not just our physical bodies, although that's really important too. All of the internal emotional work that we do, that true self-care, that all gets us ready to do the things that we're here to do in this life and the things that we want to accomplish out in the world. We can enjoy not being there yet. We can enjoy not being at the finish line of all of the things that we want to do in life. Cancer energy and Jupiter in Cancer is really emphasizing how important that internal preparation and tending is, not only to our experience of this life, but also to doing the things that we want to do. And on that note, Jupiter in Cancer is not about our audience. It's not about how people perceive the things that we're doing. So one thing that we can learn from Jupiter in Cancer is that we don't need to try and look tough. We can really embrace the fact that we are emotional beings just by our very nature. Some of us may be protective of ourselves or really hardened because of our life experiences, but we don't need to look protective and hard for somebody else's benefit. We don't have to put on a front. This is really about our internal perceptions and experiences and not what other people make of those internal perceptions and experiences. So it's not that we need to go out and do emotional work for an audience's approval. We need to do this because this is good for us. This is healthy for us. It's going to make us stronger in the end, but we don't need to display the strength, right? Cancer energy, if you've ever come across strong Cancer energy, they're not afraid to look soft, and that makes them hard as hell, you know? So don't, if we can embrace not being afraid of appearing like the emotional beings that we are, I mean, that's a huge accomplishment right there. And it's going to help us take ourselves to the next level in the world if we just don't if we don't have to be so protective of ourselves and just allowing the softer parts of us to exist. Cancer energy also very much has to do with our relationships, and not every relationship, but really our family of origin, the people that we grew up with, and also our chosen family. So, this can be a time where we can really invest in nurturing our communities and nurturing those close family like connections. And we can invest in those emotionally, really. And part of that may be opening up emotionally more to those people. Not everybody has a great relationship or any relationship with their family of origin. So, if that's the case for you, it doesn't mean that you need to seek out people that you may not be in contact with, but it may mean that there is some processing that needs to be done or some exploration that needs to be done of those relationships. But if those relationships are more strained, this may be a time where you can invest a little bit more energy, and actually you can learn a lot about the relationship. It doesn't mean that the relationship is going to necessarily be resolved in the ideal way that you might like, but there are things that can be learned from those relationships and how you choose to navigate them or explore them over the course of this next year. Because if you want to strengthen those relationships, allowing for more emotional availability or emotional vulnerability can be one way where you can strengthen those connections or grow those relationships. Another thing is that if you have relationships in your life with loved ones or even children of your own, connecting with children over the course of Jupiter in Cancer can be a really powerful experience. Some of us are really good with kids or really good with younger people. Some of us younger people are just drawn to or respond to. So it may be the case that there are opportunities for you over the course of the next year to invest more in those relationships. Maybe it's like becoming a part of the Big Brother, Big Sister program, or some kind of mentorship of younger people during this time can have a lot of value, not only to you, but to the person, the young person, the child that you're mentoring or working with. Maybe you are just somebody, that lives in a community. I am somebody that believes that children belong to the communities that they are a part of, which means that I think that communities have a responsibility to their children. So, for those of us who do not have children of our own, maybe that looks like investing some time into the neighborhood school board or becoming involved in programs that support children within your community. Or maybe you have a skill or a service, or you can be a coach of some kind. All of these kinds of things are really important. And what I want to say is, zooming out a little bit, this is especially important on a collective level, because we are seeing a lot of right-wing conservative extremists. They are very diligent about appealing to children and building relationships to children. So unfortunately, a lot of children are being harmed by those connections in a certain way. And I'm not saying that we will necessarily have the ability to stop that harm from occurring. But what I will say is that it is important for those of us who are not right-wing conservative extremists to also invest in the children in our communities, because they deserve love, they deserve acceptance. And those are not things that right-wing conservatives are necessarily offering to the children in our community. So it's really important for those of us who do not believe or operate in that way to show up for the children too, right? So there's a variety of ways that that can look, but I just want to put it out there that that is something I think we should all be thinking about over the course of the next year. Another thing I want to say about all of our relationships during this time period is we really want to look closer at our connections and our personal identity, Are these connections and how we identify ourselves and who we identify with, are they means of enriching our lives and our understanding and building connection with people? Or are they a means to distance ourselves from people who fall outside of the group, right? This is going to be a big theme collectively over the course of the next year. And every single one of us is going to have opportunities to double down on who we are, either as a means of connection or as a means of shutting people who do not belong to those categories out in some way. Some of this is going to look like nationalism. Some of this is going to look like homophobia. Some of this is going to look like if you're not with us, you're against us. And so we all need to have those conversations with ourselves and look at the world around us. Do we need more division? Can we accept who we are and the categories that we place ourselves in without using that as a means to separate us from people who aren't in those categories? And what is the effect and impact of that? You can be proud of who you are and proud of your identities without using that as a means to put other people below you in some kind of way or separate from you in some kind of way. And so that is going to be an important conversation that we all need to have with ourselves and decide what our approach is going to be. Because Jupiter in Cancer is going to be a time to grow our connections. And it means that it's also going to be a time where we can grow disconnection as well. So we really want to be careful with that because on a social level, I think that we're going to see just how ugly that gets, unfortunately. Now, zooming out a bit, Jupiter in Cancer and our relationship on an individual level to the rest of the world. It's important to know that over the course of Jupiter in Cancer, there are a lot of authority figures and even cultural and social expectations that are going to use the fact that because something is happening to some group of people that you might not be a part of, those authority figures are going to bank on you not caring because it's not happening directly to you or a group that you're a part of, right? And they're going to have success with that in some places, right? There are some places we're seeing anti-immigrant sentiment, for example, picking up really heavily. And so there are going to be plenty of people like, well, I'm not an immigrant. I'm not a person of color who is at risk of being detained or abducted or human trafficked. But I'm just going to put earplugs in and, this has nothing to do with me, right? That is a choice that we could all choose to make during this time. And there are authority figures and cultures that are going to expect that. They're going to bank on that. But it's a way to control you. It's a way to control all of us. So one thing I want to really encourage is that we take a look at how we are allowing these kinds of narratives to impact how we treat each other and what we do care about or don't care about. Because that famous poem, first they came for the communists, and then it continues category by category. If we kind of let other people be dehumanized and human trafficked, there's really not a lot stopping that from happening to us. Maybe not as quickly, but we're really at a point in history where it is so unacceptable, even if you're just self-interested, which I don't encourage. But even if you're just self-interested, it's not a good tactic to ignore all the bad things that are happening to other people, because sooner or later, it might be at your doorstep. So it's going to be about investing in the things that you care about and standing up for the things that appeal to you. Even if they don't directly involve you, it's important to show up in whatever ways you can. That is going to be huge for Jupiter in Cancer. Another thing is, if you are somebody who identifies as a woman or are interested in reproductive rights at all, this is a point in time where I'm really going to say, over the course of Jupiter in Cancer, you need to decide how you are going to stand up for those rights, especially if you live in the United States. Because I do think that over the course of the next year, we're going to have a lot of us facing issues with the government interfering with our medical decisions. And, they have very sinister reasons for doing that. But We need to, reproductive health and women's issues, I think, are things that really need to be at the top of the list of things that we care about and invest our time and energy in over the course of Jupiter in Cancer. Likewise, for those of you who are in my Patreon, if you are a sponsor, you already got the episode that I did on Jupiter in Cancer and world events. One of the things that I talked about when I made predictions in that episode was that Jupiter in Cancer was going to have a lot of narratives, a lot of propaganda about protecting children, protecting the children, saving the children, right? Children are deserving of protection, 100%, no disputing that. But what we have seen over the last several years, I'm going to use the United States as an example, is a lot of really scary legislation and really scary ideas being promoted as means to save the children. We need to protect the children online by doing lots of surveillance, right? So whenever you hear somebody talking about we need to save the children, we need to protect the children, and this is how we're going to do it, you need to look closer at what it is they are actually offering, because there are so many instances that we've seen over the last few years. And I think over Jupiter in Cancer, we're only going to see more of this happening, this effort, this push. The narrative of saving the children covers up a lot of dangerous and ugly things. So if you care about protecting children, it is really important that you care about the world that children are walking into, right? So if we protect the children by making internet surveillance even more normalized than it already is, when children become adults, then they're just going to be living in a horrific surveillance state that has only gotten worse. We can protect children by addressing the root of these issues and having honest conversations instead of leaning into conspiracy theories about human trafficking or allowing the government to do horrible surveillance projects in their name. Another thing we need to look at on a collective level over the course of Jupiter in Cancer is refusing nationalism. A lot of countries are going to have the expectation and desire that citizens of those countries really double down on our identities as citizens, as belonging to a certain country. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having pride in where you're from. But I do think that there has been an effort, especially with Western countries, for us to invest in nationalism so that we don't care as much about the rest of the world. And I'm recording this in June of 2025, and we're on the brink of even more wars escalating in the world, right? And the ways that war escalates is because people don't see themselves in the people that they are attacking. They don't relate enough in a lot of cases, especially in the West. We've been encouraged to look at non-Western countries as lesser than, as if the people who live there, their lives don't matter as much as ours. And this is a really dangerous and destructive idea that is going to be served to a lot of us on a silver platter, right? And it's our job to look at that and say, you know what? My care and my compassion and my ability to be an emotional human being is so much bigger than my nationality. So you can have pride in who you are, but my invitation to you, and I think the invitation of Jupiter in Cancer, is to expand upon these ideas of nationality, right? Because we live on a small planet. And what if we viewed ourselves as part of a larger, this is so corny, but it's real, if we viewed ourselves as part of a larger human family instead of a family based on nation or a family based on race? Pluto is in Aquarius while we're having this Jupiter in Cancer transit. So there is this really strong contrast between identifying ourselves as human beings, as part of a global community, versus doubling down on these micro identities that all of us have some allegiance to. We don't have to limit our care. We don't have to limit our compassion, right? And we're learning that with Jupiter in Cancer, is that there is no limit on the care that we can express for ourselves and others. It's not a finite resource. It's not a finite resource. And nationalism is a concept based on finite resources. There's not enough for everyone. And we know that's a lie. So one of the beautiful things that is possible with Jupiter in Cancer is that human beings can be okay with their differences. They can accept these niche identities that we all put ourselves in, right? But we can also be a part of something much larger, and we can actually have value for all of human life, right? It's not a finite resource. And so Jupiter in Cancer is an opportunity for us to really experience that on a new level and really identify with people and human beings in a way that we may never have done before because of the nationalism and the racism and the Western supremacy that has been enacted upon the world. We can choose going forward to do things differently because we are seeing that we need a better world. We need a better world. And that means that we're going to have to break down some of those barriers and some of those walls that have been put up to keep us divided and to keep us separated. So I am really excited for Jupiter in Cancer. You know, when we're diving into our emotional selves like this, it's a lot. It can be overwhelming in a certain sense. But look at this year as a massive learning experience where we can really connect to ourselves on a whole new level and work through some of that old stuff that maybe has been keeping us where we are, stagnating us. There's a lot of opportunity for emotional growth and human to human connection. And so, even though on a collective level, on a mundane level, Jupiter in Cancer has some really challenging stuff for us on a collective level. I think that the way that we all choose to respond to these world events that are happening is going to give us the opportunity to refuse a lot of these narratives that have been placed upon us about how different we all are. And yeah, humans do have a lot of differences. There's a lot of cultures and a lot of variety in the human experience. And that's beautiful. It can be a beautiful thing, and it can actually be something that brings us closer together. So that's my hope for this. If you're listening to this podcast on the day it comes out, happy new moon in Cancer. This has been a really emotional Cancer season, and we're really at the early stages of it. So, you know, hang in there. We're feeling some big feelings. We have Jupiter in Cancer for the first time in 12 years. So that in and of itself is a lot of emotion. But not only that, it's also square Saturn and Neptune in Aries. So it's making quite a statement. And I think a lot of people are triggered as fuck right now, to be honest. It feels like a lot of bad replays of old stories. But that's not all it is, and that's not all it's going to be. I want to remind you that history often rhymes, but it doesn't repeat. And we are living in a time where some rare energetic dynamics are happening, which means there's also a lot of potential here for the story to play out very differently than it has in the past. That is true on a collective level and on a personal level, because the outside world impacts our inner worlds and vice versa. So we can feed into our worst fears, our most heightened emotions, that we are small and vulnerable and need to be afraid. Or we can remember how much shit we've gotten ourselves through before this, and our ancestors before us, and those before them. We can also ask them for help. We can call upon their guidance. We can be conscious about what we're trying to create out of all of this destruction. We can let our emotions guide us to a bigger perspective, to more opportunities for ourselves that are right and true to who we are and how we feel. Or we can give in to our most violent fears and worst nightmares just because something bad happened to us before. We get to choose how we project our emotions onto ourselves and the world around us. Let them be a guide and not a weapon. So this new moon in Cancer, it's happening on June 25th at 3:31 a.m. Pacific time. And it's happening at 4 degrees and 7 minutes of Cancer. So if you find where that is in your astrology chart, what house it's in, and whatever planets it may or may not be interacting with in your chart, that will give you more information about how this new moon is going to impact you. But as with any new moon, this is a new start. And if you've ever looked up at the sky when we have a new moon, you'll notice that there is no moon to see, right? It's not like a full moon. It's not as sexy and out in your face. And that's because the moon is not illuminated by the sun. We don't have that light and that total perspective. And that means that we have to really go within. We have to search. We have to introspect. It's all not going to be laid out neatly for us. And that's okay, because we are emotional beings. We are spiritual beings, and those two things are actually the same thing. We are so tuned out of our emotions, and for some of us, that has been a survival mechanism, something that has helped us get to this point. So we can thank ourselves for doing that for ourselves, that maybe some things were too big or too heavy before this point in our life to unpack. But maybe things are a little safer because you know more and you can do more for yourself now than maybe you could before. This new moon, you really want to set your intentions for how you want to interact with yourself as an emotional being, because it's 2025, babe. It's not what it used to be. The world has changed a lot, right? We're all kind of figuring that out together. So what does it mean for us to show up as our full emotional selves, our full spiritual selves? And starting with us, what does it mean to show up for ourselves in that way? That means we can be, hopefully, totally vulnerable, totally open to all of the parts of ourselves, because shouldn't we at the very least be able to feel at home with ourselves? We are at home with ourselves. So what does that look like for you? What does it feel like to come home to yourself? And how do you want that to shape how you show up in the world? If you're someone who really likes to be conscious with your energy, if you're someone who likes to be very creative and deliberate about the things that you want out of your future, this is a very good new moon for manifesting. This is a good new moon to think, especially in terms of the next 6 months and how those 6 months fit into your longer term goals. And when I say goals, I'm not just talking about, career, buying a house, getting married, all of the stuff that we're told that we have to want, right? I want you to think about your future in terms of emotions rather than stuff or achievements. Those things come and go as life evolves, but we always come home to ourselves. I hope you have a happy new moon in Cancer. If you haven't made it to Petty Astrology Live, you are missing out. I go live every Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific on Twitch, and I dive deeper into the astrology of the moment in conversation with viewers like you. Make sure you check that out. You can also join the Petty Astrology community over in Patreon. It's free. You get my newsletter and access to our current events chat, where I talk more about my predictions, plus our community chat where you can meet other astrologers and lovely listeners of the show. And I'm going to be running a flash reading sale sometime this summer for everyone in the Patreon, even free members, so you don't want to miss out on that. If you become a sponsor of the show, it starts at only $5 a month, and you also get replays of that live show that I do, plus bonus podcast episodes. All of the links are in the show notes. That's it for this week's episode. Tune in on Patreon for even more Petty Astrology. This episode was written, edited, and produced by me, Kaycee Felton-Lui. The podcast art is by Max Swanson. The music is by Paul Schneider. This podcast is brought to you by my sponsors over on Patreon.